In my last post, I told you why I am personally what you'd call a white nationalist. Well, in this article, I'm going to tell you why I'm not what you'd normally call a white nationalist. What I meant by saying that whites could group together and form an ethnostate wasn't really an open invitation for all whites around the world to come to live with me in a white ethnostate, because that wouldn't really be an ethnostate, would it? An ethnostate can't be built upon hundreds of different groups of whites, because white isn't an origin, so to speak. Finns are white, Swedes are white, Poles are white, but we all are distinct groups. We're genetically closer to each other than say Finns would be to Africans, sure, but we're not the same, and for me personally, that distinction matters. I want Finland to remain majority Finnish, not just broadly majority white. I want people to stick with their homelands and work to make their own countries better, so that there wouldn't have to be any kind of migration in the first place. If a group of American whites claimed a piece of land from Antarctica and started to build their own ethnostate there, I'd applaud the effort, I'd applaud their evolutionary spirit, but no way in hell would I ever join them, simply because they aren't Finnish, and I'm not American, they're not my people and I'm not their kind. I found it extremely funny, that when I googled phrases like how to preserve your ethnic culture, or preserving ethnicity, I only found articles on how people on the modern age could preserve their ethnicity, and even be proud of it, if they happened to belong to an exotic group. And that's to say, if they weren't white. The main focus of these articles seemed to be, that in the modern age, when all the beautiful and distinct exotic cultures have been forced together with multiculturalism, immigration, and social media interactions, there's simply no way you couldn't meet these other, strange and foreign cultures in today's world, even if you wanted no part of them. These bits went on and on about how living in majority white nations can be hard on immigrants since it's not their own country, since the host culture isn't their own culture, and the people in those countries aren't like them. To this, I'd like to present a simple solution. Maybe you shouldn't live in a majority white country. Then? Oh well, the Democrats and the EU are already taking care of that for them, since we're not going to be the majority in Europe for long anymore anyways. Pretty black pilling, ain't it? So, apparently it's only good and acceptable to take pride in your culture and heritage if you're not white, despite all the good things that whites have brought to the world. I mean, when majority white nations sent their explorers to conquer the world they were yet to know, most majority black countries didn't even have any written languages. Wrap your head around that. Even Africa benefited greatly from the arrival of white colonialism. See, when Europeans arrived to the shores of Africa, the African natives were simply savages living among savages, and in fact, they remained that way a couple hundred years after the colonialists left. During their time in Africa, Europeans were building roads, forming education to themselves and for the natives too, in their native tribal tongues, actually, but as one could have foreseen. They cared not about education or culture. They didn't care about love for thy neighbor. They were simple savages living in a world of relentless violence. And after whites left, they continued their barbaric lifestyle for a good while. In my eyes, a white nationalist is someone who places more importance on the mere color of the skin over actual ethnicities. Of course, the way I see it, a color of person's skin is a fair starting point, but I don't think it should end in that. No, I think it would be wiser to dive deeper into the ideology of segregation. Does this mean that I'm cucking on this? Well, no. I don't honestly think that a black person, or a person of color, to use the modern verbal lingo, can ever truly be Finnish. It's simply not the case that there ever was an actual black Finnish population in the history, prior to black immigration starting to take place to Finland in the not so far back history. Finland was always a white majority country, and I'd like it to stay that way, although it isn't exactly looking that good now, is it? Nowadays, the largest groups of non-Finnish ethnicities residing in Finland are Russians, Estonians, and for crying out loud, Somalis. In 2017, hundreds of Muslim asylum seekers from Afghanistan and Iraq came to Finland, only to have their first asylum applications rejected. After that major hit, we saw hundreds of asylum-seeking Muslims converting to Christianity, in order to reapply for asylum on the grounds of religious persecution. I mean, how twisted is that? There's no honor, there's no respect for their own culture, there's only lies and deceit, and worst of all, in the end, they were allowed to settle to Finland. I swear I would have foreseen this. If I absolutely had to pick, who gets to migrate to Finland, Swedes or Somalis, I'd obviously go for Swedes. But this sort of choice is only a choice in the loosely defined way, because we really wouldn't have to take any immigrants, from anywhere. The only reason we do take them are the faceless bureaucrats in the Brussels that have successfully convinced the Finnish-speaking politicians to take part in this scheme of shared responsibility. It's this worldview, that if you're doing great, or actually, if you're not on the brink of destruction, you are expected to help everyone else, you know, the communist way. It's the same idea that applies to most of the leftist ideology. If you have a big house, you have to house migrants. If you have a good income, you have to be taxed into oblivion. If you want to call yourself a good person and you don't wish to be attacked both verbally and physically, you have to vote left, and in fact, you have to do your best at demonizing the other side, sincere or not. I find all this talk about Orwell to be overused and a bit cringy, but fuck me, this really is 1984 come to life. My belief is essentially that white nationalism in its core is purely reactionary. It's a starting point, it's a concept simple enough to easily understand, and it has the edge, in the name already, that is needed if you're to evoke this certain revolutionary spirit in the Western man. White nationalism is reactionary because it stands in opposition to the mass immigration system now ruining the West. It is a way for Europeans to unite in ideology and mission under one single banner that says immigrants aren't welcome here, we have enough problems as is. White nationalism is the opposition to the current establishment, and ethnic nationalism is the ideology that should be ascribed to by every single majority European country. Of course, I give recognition to every black nationalist movement. There's actually a couple of those too, because they too can recognize the importance of being able to talk about racial differences and the underlying effects they have on the modern world. If I got to choose, every country would adopt a view of ethnic nationalism, because every man and woman should work to make their own countries better for their own people. That's ultimately the only way that the Western world will ever be able to survive the attack that's going on right now, under our very eyes. In my heart, I'll always be a libertarian, but I do recognize the need for some kind of modern collectivism to arise in the West. It's the ability to see past mere individuals, to see past yourself in order to take care of the problems that affect each and every one of your countrymen. Your neighbors matter, in the sense that you are in direct contact to them in your everyday life, but what matters more, is who you allow to enter your country, because that doesn't only affect you, it affects you plus everyone around you. If the crime rates go up in every other city but yours, it doesn't affect you, but it surely will affect your children, and their children. It will ultimately have a drastic effect on the continuation of your family lineage, your genes, your world. Ethnic nationalism is what stands in opposition to this. As the anti-immigration sentiment has finally lifted its head out of the sand, after years of anxious waiting and anticipation, there are, as there's always, some crooks. These crooks are your everyday mainstream conservatives. And while the phrase conservatives can serve nothing is used a bit much, it still stands very much true. Now more than ever. There are people, public figures, who say, or don't say, in fear of getting some heat from the other side, that they are conservatives. They put on the easy to see through mask of classical liberalism, or sometimes even libertarianism. They speak in tongues and make their whole agenda about standing in opposition to the newly born SJW culture. They speak against third-wave feminism. They go on television to own leftist speakers and make them triggered. They get paid a whole bunch of money on basically ridiculing the other side, without making any clear-cut arguments on which they themselves could stand on. Let's name a few here. Most of you are probably aware of Jordan Peterson by now. He rose to fame after his public fight against Bill C-16 in Canada, and his fame skyrocketed once he wrote this book called 12 Rules for Life, and started touring to promote the book. Jordan Peterson isn't a politician. He's a Canadian clinical psychologist and a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. He spoke against a law that would have legally required teachers to refer to students not by their gender of birth, but by their preferred pronouns, meaning that a kid could say he's a girl even though he was a boy, and if he were to be misgendered by a teacher, there would be legal consequences. Now, I side with Peterson on this thing. He had some good points about why free speech is important, why the government shouldn't be allowed to enforce speech with a threat of criminal charges, you know, all that. Obviously I agree. Now, he goes around stating he's not a political figure, but he doesn't seem to be able to stop speaking about politics, maybe because that's making his income huge, since he will go on and on about the danger of identity politics. Okay Jordan, what other types of politics are there, besides identity politics? There aren't any. Why wouldn't you want people to group up with people who agree with them, to forward a political agenda, you know? That's literally how politics work. He masquerades as a classical liberal, all while playing into the pockets of all other anti-white groups. He makes a huge deal of himself by owning these female leftist TV hosts, but when questioned by the right wing, and I'm not talking about your average mainstream conservative, there's nothing but silence. He says that it's important and crucial that you're in control of what kind of people you surround yourself with. But when a white guy says he wants to live with other white guys, hold on, that's dangerous, that's one small step from Hitlerism. Blah. I say, fuck the conservatives, and fuck yeah, identity politics. Another quick example of these people would be your average edgy and cool conservatives, like Ben Shapiro, or Gavin McInnes. These people who aren't dumb, but they're so far up their own asses, and so far up the ass of the left, that they go around triggering these idiots, and then roll on the ground saying I'm sorry, I'm not a racist, blah blah, blah blah. It's these people who, when confronted, say they're libertarians because what they value the most is liberty and freedom. But when asked about the demographics of that said free country full of liberty and nice things, they say stupid shit like people who believe in freedom. Well, who are those people? Are they Africans? Name me one majority black country that's more free than any European country, and no, Turkey will never be a European country, whether they're in the EU or not. The harsh reality of the situation is that if you want a country that is democracy, peace, solidarity and happiness, a high-trust country where the crime rates are as low as possible, then yeah, that country would be majority white, and this shouldn't surprise any one of you. Below are their statistics of crime in Finland and Norway, published in 2014 by the Journal of Scandinavian Studies and Criminology and Crime Prevention. In the written form in my blog, there are statistics of rates of violent crimes and larceny in Norway and Finland with populations aged 15-64 by immigrant groups here. Now, as I told you before, Somalis are one of the biggest non-Finnish groups living in Finland right now. As you can clearly see, white populations, as has always been, commit way less crime than those of other ethnicities. The article under these stats states, in the chapter called Introduction, the following. Global migration patterns have made the link between immigration and crime a pressing concern in politics and public debates in the Nordic countries, as is also evident throughout the developed world. However, current knowledge on crime among immigrants is limited, although a number of studies have shown that immigrants are overrepresented in the crime statistics in the Nordic countries. Anderson and Trans, 2011, Gunderson, Haslund, Hustad, and Steen, 2000, Haslund, 2004, Cardell, 2006, Martins and Holmberg, 2005, Skardhammar, Thorson, and Henriksen, 2011. No wonder these people have to blame racism. admitting that the crime stats aren't biased, rigged, or racist. They'd have to actually take a long look at themselves and start figuring out what's wrong. That's a thing that every single population should do. At a regular basis, figure out the current problems, and come together in order to solve them. I know Muslims won't do this, but I won't even talk about Muslims here. If it were up to me, I wouldn't allow a single Muslim into Europe, or America for that matter, no matter their race, simply because I just hate religious fanaticism so much. They can preserve their barbaric and vile, anti-modern practices in wherever they are from, but in Europe, they simply can't do that. They wish to stone the gays. They force women to wear trash bags over themselves so that other men won't get the sudden urge to rape them, and if they get raped, they're probably stoned or beaten to death. Allah has gotten enough sacrifices already. It's time to stop. To wrap up this post, that got way longer than I anticipated it would become, I'll say this: in order to keep the Western world Western, we must keep it Western. If you're out there shouting West is the best, but refuse to talk about the things that make West the best, or more accurately, talk about WHO makes the West the best there is, you're part of the problem. Grow up, and start looking at the world with less biases. We are what we are. As I said, I like Swedes, but I don't want them here, in Finland, because I want Finland to remain majority Finnish. And if we did bring a few thousand Swedes here, and they happened to have very high birth rates, they'd eventually be the majority. That's the simple math we must do when looking at our current low birth rates in Finland, and the high birth rates of immigrants we're bringing in. If you refuse to talk about the reality of race, if you don't wake up soon enough, West won't be the best for that much longer. Once again, thank you so much for reading, and as always, stay infidel. Finish infidel.